everyone. This is, yes, I'm at Stockton University in the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center, but I love saying this every morning. I don't know what I'm going to do Friday morning. I won't be able to say it. Live from Jerusalem. And I'm looking at my friend Sheryl, who's sitting in her house in Jerusalem, and we certainly messed up her dog schedule because her dog is usually out barking at this time. And welcome to the Wally and Lutz Hammerschlag Summer Educator Seminar. We're going to begin today by introducing two of our faculty members here at Stockton. One is Dr. Judy Vogel. Judy, could you give a wave? I'm looking for you on my screen. Yes, there's Judy. And can you unmute Judy just for a minute so she can say good morning to so many of, we have broken another record today. We have 96 educators that will be with us this morning as we're now they're going through our security system. We're opening it up. But welcome, Judy. And if you just tell everyone your role here at Stockton and what you're coordinator of, and then I will introduce Roz Siegel.
Hi, everyone. As Gail said, I'm Judy Vogel, and I'm the coordinator for the minor in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. I'm really excited to be here. I've been talking a lot recently to one of our photography professors, Wendell White, about maybe getting a course that talks about photography and memory and the Holocaust as sort of a tribute to our survivors and those who we've lost, even very recently. And so I'm thrilled to be a part of this class, and I am so grateful that there's so many educators here today, because that's really what this is all about, is educating the next generation.
Thank you, Judy. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Roz Siegel. Roz is the director of our Master of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And we know that some of you are, excuse the expression, shopping for a graduate program that you would like to join, that possibly could help you in your career, as well as for you to gain knowledge in teaching about Holocaust and Genocide Studies. So Roz.
Good morning, good afternoon to some of you, I think. As Gail said, I direct the MA program. I'm just going to take a few minutes of your time, and some of you have, heard my little spiel last year, perhaps, some students on the Zoom I've seen. But I can't see everyone now because of different kind of screen share. But I want to get a sense of it. If anyone, also you can put on the chat if you know how many. I began my involvement in this field as a master's student almost 20 years ago. And I'm wondering how many people know 20 years ago how many refugees there were in the world. Could put in the chat.
We have been using the chat, Roz, because so many of us. So if you would use the chat when you're answering Roz's question, that would be great. And Roz, I'll be your checker of the chat. How does that sound?
I can see the chat. That's
okay, that's great.
So anyone, how many refugees in the world 20 years ago? Any guess? Terrific, Doug. Wow. Actually 21.3 million 20 years ago. But anyone knows how many refugees there are in the world today?
30 million.
Up. A bit more, Amy? A bit more than 70 million? Actually, we have 79.5 million, probably a bit more according to official UN counts, United Nations counts, refugees and displaced people. And that doesn't actually include dozens of millions of other refugees from development projects like Megadem constructions and other displaced people. But almost 80 million refugees Yes, exactly. Way more due to natural disasters and other development projects. But we have, so just from wars and mass violence, state violence, we've added 60 more million refugees and displaced people in the last 20 years. And that's why me personally, I'm continuously in distress working in this field, because I always feel, and I have dozens of millions of people to confirm this, that something isn't working, right? We have so many victims of mass atrocities around us in the world. And one of the things that I try to do in the program, and one of the things that the program does, is continuously think and rethink the situation, right? How do we think about the history of the Holocaust? How do we think about the history of genocide and mass atrocities in the 20th century in relation to the state of the world, in relation to the deteriorating state of the world as we see around us? We ask very difficult questions, very uncomfortable questions. Part of our role is to ask these difficult and uncomfortable questions, to confuse. As I always say, a very important pedagogical tool is to confuse students, right? To make sure that we're unsettled in what we think we know, right? To realize what we don't know, to realize the kind of questions that we're not yet asking, right? Why aren't we asking them? What kind of research directions they will be sending us, right? What kind of conversations they will open up with our students. So this is what we do in the program. I think it's highly, highly urgent, right? We have 80 million people in the world who need it desperately, who are displaced, stateless. Usually they're also voiceless, and this is where my own, might say, ethical position, specifically as a Holocaust scholar, comes in, right? The voices of the victims, the voices of the refugees, and these people are usually voiceless. We don't hear them, we don't listen to them. They're usually erased from the historical record in many ways. So this is very important. We focus a lot now also on refugees specifically in the program, but we really think through them, right? How have we got here? Where are we going? How can we understand this history of the Holocaust and the Holocaust within genocide in the 20th century in different ways, in a way that hopefully in 20 years' time, right, we'll see a dramatic decline in the number of refugees and displaced people and victims of state violence, right, and not 60 million more as in the last 20 years. If you have any questions about the program, if you'd like to know more, you can feel free to reach out to me by email. Program students will tell you that I respond very fast to emails. I'm happy to talk with people on Zoom, on the phone, and tell you more about the program and what we do and what are the opportunities that the program opens up for you. So feel free to contact me.
I have a few questions. One is, please put your contact information in the chat box so
Sure.
we know how to get you. Second question is, how many of our graduates are here today? If you could just put, you know, a sign up, yes, or put it in the chat box. I'm here, MAHG graduate. We'd love to see how many of you are here today, because one of the best ways about talking about a program or a product is to talk to someone who was part of it. So we have Natalie Love, Tom Sheridan, wow, Michael Morris, Leah Dukes, who is currently a student. I don't know who Cross Paws is. I'm sorry.
It's Liz Clem. Hi, Liz.
Oh, Liz Clem, I'm sorry. Thank you. Would you read the list? Morgan, you know the names better. I left off with Doug Survey.
Yeah, sure. Doug Survey, Sheryl, who's our presenter today, was a graduate of the GPC, the Genocide Prevention Program. Irvin is a current student. Amy Fagan, current student. So glad to see a bunch of you
Natalie
guys
Love,
here.
current student.
Yeah.
Anybody
Talia?
else?
No.
Okay, well, that's great. So, Brianna Doherty is a current student.
And of course, Steve Marcus.
Yeah, and I would say about 10% then of our participants today are graduates of the program. So
let me just say one more thing, and I see that Michael added here in the chat that our program is, of course, it's possible to complete it fully online. And we also have a fully online 15 credit certificate in graduate prevention that we also offer. We have the information on our website, of course. But again, if you have any questions about the program and ideas about what you'd like to do as a graduate student, if you just have questions as a teacher and you'd like just to consult with us, to have, get ideas, we're also happy to talk with you about those kinds of things. So please free to contact me or any of the other faculty, or Morgan Everman, our program assistant, who really makes everything work and move in the program. Thank you, Morgan.
So thank you very much. And I want to say that Steve Marcus and Roz Siegel work hand in hand with dual high school credit in helping to service the high schools, as well as Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center. So thank you very much. And that transitions into introducing Dr. Michael Hayes, who very appropriately reminded us to let you all know that our MAHG program right now, due to the pandemic, is online, but we do have face-to-face classes. So every morning, this is the third morning I've said, live from Jerusalem, the Wally and Lutz Hammerschlag Summer Educator Seminar. So many of you asked, well, who are the Hammerschlags? What is this about? And so Michael, who is part of our undergraduate as well as our graduate program faculty member, who is a historian, is going to give us a little background and introduce to us Leonard Hammerschlag, the son of Wally and Lutz, who is currently in Cape Town, South Africa. Michael, you're on.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning again to those people who I've seen the last couple of days as well. It's really my pleasure to introduce Leonard Hammerschlag, who normally would be here with us, but the pandemic has sort of locked him in to South Africa, to Cape Town, where he usually spends the winters. Leonard is a very generous friend of the program, and I'd like to say of me, I've worked with him to document his family story, which I hope he'll talk a little bit about today. I know he'll talk a little bit about today. He spends about half the year normally in Atlantic City and the other half in Cape Town. So I'd like to just turn it over to you, Leonard.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Great. Okay, sorry for a bit of a delay. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody, especially the educators, over 90 of you, for taking time out in the middle of August. Nice summertime. Last thing you want to do is carry on your studies and worry about your students. So I really appreciate all of you attending. I'm pretty damn sure from what I've seen and what I've heard the last few days, you're going to take away a lot of useful information. And for that, I would like to thank 3 people, and I hope I'm not leaving anybody out. And that's Gail, Morgan, and Irvin. Without them, we'd have none of this. So thank you very much. Okay, so I'm the youngest son of Lutz and Wally Hammerschlag. Both my parents, my mother's maiden name was Moritz. The family left in April 1939 from Frankfurt. My father's name was obviously Hammerschlag. They also left in 1939 from a very small village in the north of Germany called Lauenau near Hanover. And they didn't know each other. Both peoples arrived in 1939 from 2 totally different backgrounds in Germany. Kristallnacht in Frankfurt, as you're about to hear, was a huge event, as it was in most of the big cities. But in Lauenau, the small village where my father's family, thanks to Michael and Gail, I have a lot of recorded history, goes back to 1692. There was nothing. So it's a really important time, as you just heard from Raz, with all the refugees and everything that's going on, that we try and stop it, and that happens with education. So that's why I funded this program, and once again, thank you. So I'm going to read something which my mother wrote In 1988, when she was already living in Israel after having left Rhodesia, Zimbabwe it is called today. And I'll just say one thing. For my mother, as a 9-year-old, this was the defining moment of her life. On the 9th of November 1938, the situation took a very violent turn. That is a day that, try I may, I will never be able to erase from my memory. That morning, I walked to school with 2 friends, as usual. Being November, it was still dark outside and very cold. As we happily turned the corner to the school, we saw huge flames leaping from the building and realized the whole school was on fire. The reaction was mixed. Some were happy there would be no school for some time, but all of us were very frightened and realized that something terrible had happened. We went back home, and on the way, near our apartment, I met my father walking between 2 men. I stopped, greeted him, and naturally told him about the fire at the school and asked him where he was going. He told me not to worry, to go home to my mother, and he would soon be home. I found my mother in tears. She told me that the Gestapo had arrested my father and that a decree had been issued to arrest all Jewish men in Germany. All the men, excuse me, from our building and the whole street were gone, and the women and children did not know what to do and where to turn. Then the noise started. Crowds and mobs appeared in the street, cheering and screaming and waving flags. They had come to loot and destroy our homes. All the women and children ran to the attic, and a ghastly fear and gloom fell over us. Then we heard the sound of glass shattering, and we knew that they had arrived in our building. There was a piercing scream and then an uneasy silence. We waited a while and then went to our apartment on the ground floor to see what had happened. The front door had been smashed and all the windows were broken. A glass 100-day clock standing in the entrance hall had broken into 1,000,000 pieces. Obviously someone had got cut, hence the piercing screams, but they left our building. Since that awful day, I've always had a soft spot for these clocks, as I firmly believe that it saved all our lives. These are my own childhood recollections of Kristallnacht. Thank you.
So, Leonard, thank you so much for that moving
My
article.
pleasure.
And I want to remind everyone that you have the full article that was written by Wally that appeared in the newspaper in Israel that was sent to you yesterday. And Morgan, let's resend it today just in case it got lost in folks' emails. Today's seminar is about photography. And one of the ways we're going to segue into our seminar is, Dr. Hayes, I wondered if you wanted to share a few photographs with us that further illustrates what Leonard was speaking about. And Kristallnacht, for those of you that are just beginning your journey, occurred on November 9th to 10th, 1938. Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Gail. Yeah, so I wanted to share a few photographs because we'll be learning about a little bit about how to read photographs, how to sort of deploy photographs in education. Wally Hammerschlag, who was born and grew up as a young girl in Frankfurt, Germany, was born Wally Moritz to an Orthodox Jewish family that was actually fairly prominent in their own synagogue community. In the great synagogue that you see here, that was built in the 1880s. Lots of different ways to read this 1920s photograph. It shows that the Frankfurt Jewish community, like many of the Jewish communities in German cities, Frankfurt had the second largest Jewish community in Germany after Berlin, was a prosperous community, and with emancipation in the 19th century, was prominent. You know, they were very forward in their religion. You know, the legal equality that they had achieved allowed them to build these really wonderful synagogues. They had also become, as a community as a whole, quite prosperous and integrated into German society. That is reflected, among other things, in the architecture that you see here. This is the synagogue also that Wally had witnessed where she was going to school. Also, there was a school in the synagogue. She witnessed burning in the piece that you just heard. So if we could go to the next slide, Morgan. And this is one that really, I'd like to ask people maybe to tell me what you see in this photograph. This is obviously one of the many synagogues that was destroyed by arson by the Nazis and their helpers on Kristallnacht in 1938. Many photographs like this, including many other photographs of this synagogue on fire. So let me see if I can actually view my chat. So what do people see? What's notable?
Your comments.
Please put your comments and any questions in the chat box, please.
I see Doug right away with bystanders. Yes, of course, right? And these are bystanders, right? In the sense that they are standing by, they're witnesses to this. And of course, any large event like this, you would expect sort of onlookers to come out. It doesn't necessarily mean approval or disapproval. It's hard to know, what could people have done, but certainly there's a lot of gawking going on here, right? And so Kristallnacht was not only a nationwide pogrom, the first nationwide night of violence, mass violence that took place on this grand scale in Nazi Germany, 5 years after the Nazis had come to power. But it's at this point that sort of violence becomes open and systematic, including obviously the arrest of more than 30,000 Jews, mostly men. And of those, you heard, Wally's father was one, arrested in Frankfurt, sent to Buchenwald. If we could go on to the next picture. This is Ludwig Moritz, and this is a shot that was taken after his release from Buchenwald, where he spent about 4+ weeks, with the understanding that he and his family would leave the country. And it's at this point, even actually while Ludwig was in Buchenwald, that his wife was already making desperate attempts to find a way to get out. And as we all know, the problem of Jews was that actually becoming a refugee was quite difficult, because where could they go? Who would accept them? And in the end, for reasons that I will not go into in detail, the only place that they found refuge was in southern Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe. And so in April of 1939, next slide, the family was able to get passage on the Pretoria passenger ship. This is the family. There's Wally on the left and her parents leaving for Cape Town, where Leonard is today. They stayed there with relatives for a short period before traveling on to Zimbabwe. So this is a story of refugees, of survivors. And I think it's very telling because we have these photographs, and we can put these photographs together to help to tell the story, but we should always read them critically, like with the shot of the synagogue on fire. Just one last thing. I'd like to tell a lot more of the story, but I won't, because we have an actual program today, and I don't want to steal too much time away from that. But I do want to mention that for those of you who were with us yesterday, and I believe the day before as well, some of the stumbling stones, the Stolpersteine, those memorials that are placed in front of the homes of the last addresses of victims of the Nazis. And it's worth noting here that in October of 2018, we had 4 of those stones that were placed in front of the family's address in Frankfurt. Gail was there, right?
Yes, I was there with you. And
right.
I wanted to say several things as we segue into our next section, that the silver lining to the pandemic, there has to be something good, is that we've learned, or we've become better at teaching online, and that Leonard is available, Dr. Hayes is available, I'm available, Roz Siegel is available. There's so many of us that are available to Zoom right into and talk to your students, or pre-record something for you. because this was much too short, but I want to share a few of the chats to you, Dr. Hayes, if you could answer. Is there a strong Jewish community there today, meaning in Frankfurt, and was the synagogue rebuilt or restored? And that's from Lizette, who was my student at
Okay.
Stockton.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. To make a long story short, there's only one of the major synagogues. There were several major synagogues in Frankfurt with such a large Jewish community, actually different communities. The bulk of the community was not Orthodox, but was Reformed. And that great synagogue was heavily damaged during the war, but it survived, and it was restored after the war. Yes, there is a Jewish community in Frankfurt today, and a growing Jewish community, but because of the vagaries of the war, you know, and the plight of refugees, most German Jews who had survived actually had left, like Leonard's family, and didn't return to Germany. So that the Jews who made up the bulk of the Jewish community in Germany after the war were the displaced persons, the Jews who ended up in displaced persons camps in Germany, and from there did not, like so many of them, make it out to places like the United States or Palestine and later Israel. So what you've got is mostly an Orthodox Sephardic Jewish community that has, to which has been added the refugees who were the refuseniks who come from the Soviet Union or left after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and others who've migrated there in the meantime. There are some very prominent Jews who did return, German Jews who returned after the war, but that's a long story. Some of the famous names like Theodor Adorno, the renowned sociologist.
So I wanted to say that Barbara Daniels said she'd love to learn more of Leonard's family history. Barbara, we will make, please contact us. In fact, Dr. Hayes, if you would put your contact information in the chat for everyone. And with that, would you please put in the chat the name of the synagogue that you had the photograph of, so that others can look at this and perhaps use it with their students. And Steve Marcus wanted us to tell everyone that there is an exhibit dedicated to the Hammerschlag family that was curated by Dr. Michael Hayes and Liz Clem. Liz, can you give a wave to all of us? Liz Clem, as part of her capstone for her earning her master's degree, helped in curating this exhibit. So I wanted to thank all of you and continue. You can, Liz, there you go. Liz is giving a big wave, and Liz is a teacher at ACIT. Can we make Liz live if she wants to make a comment or two? And she teaches at Atlantic County Institute of Technology, and she is a literature teacher. Am I correct, Liz?
Yes, in addition to the Holocaust studies, I teach English as well. And it was great working on that project. It was very rewarding, and it's a great project.
And it's worth noting with that for all of you teachers, once the pandemic is over, that exhibition in Ventnor, I would be very honored to meet your classes there. You can set that up through Gail, and we'll get them over to Ventnor, to the High Center.
And we have funding for buses.
There you go.
So, you know, it's a win-win. And Leonard, I just want to draw your attention to please look in the chat box. There's so many wonderful, important messages to you and the importance of your family history. So please, Leonard, make sure you see that, or we will save it and send it on to you. So let me officially begin the day today, and thank you so much. We've learned about our MAHG program, our master's program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies from Dr. Roz Siegel, and then Dr. Hayes showed us just one way of using photography with literature, you know, and we could personalize it in that we had Leonard with us. He continues to be with us. And please feel free to put messages to Leonard, Dr. Hayes, Dr. Roz Siegel in the chat box, and they will see it today. As we begin our journey about learning more about photography, I just wanted to share with you a few items. First of all, I want to remind all of you that There are refunds available. Of course, that's a joke that if you don't get your money's worth, because this is all fully sponsored, and it's fully sponsored by Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum of Israel, the Sarah and Sam Schofer Holocaust Resource Center at Stockton University, the Sam Aziz Museum of Woodbine Heritage, and Echoes and Reflections. And it's very important for us. I know it's a pain. It will take 3 to 4 minutes to fill out. Please fill out the evaluations for today, as well as if you attended other workshops. It's so important to us so that we can continue to bring these free programs to you. Today's format will be the same as the prior 2 days. There will be no break, but hey guys, if you need to take a break, take one. Please use the chat box. And you've already met our moderator today, Dr. Michael Hayes, who is a historian whose PhD is in German history. And he will be moderating and helping Sheryl along with Morgan and Irvin, if you would just both give a wave, because everyone is so correct. Leonard, thank you for saying it. We couldn't have done this without them. So thank both of you. And we will continue to be informal. So please don't be concerned if, oops, you made a mistake or we have a little tech problem, because we really, truly are live from Jerusalem and stuff happens. I want to continue with the theme today. And the theme has been every day. The time is now to learn together. The time is now to reflect and learn as we move on. And don't we know the following? The time is now to make plans, because we know that just when we have plan A done, plan B will have to be in effect. So we're going to continue with that. I wanted to give you the summary from day 1, which is about icons of the Holocaust, and using the website of Yad Vashem, which I encourage all of you, if you weren't part of that seminar, I encourage you to use their website. It's amazing. And what, in a capsule, if I could just use one sentence, what was day 1 about? Day 1 was about the human story, and that's what made our first part, I think, so important. We had Leonard that put the face to the history, and Dr. Hayes, who supplemented it with the human story and talking about human behavior and geography, where we're talking about Frankfurt. And from yesterday, using art, I love what Liz Ellsby said to us. Don't just teach a laundry list. Create normalcy through artwork. Guide your students, but let them use their own intuition, because in interpreting art, there's no right or wrong answer. Find a way. And there are many different levels of using art. And I'm sure Sheryl will agree, there are many different levels of using photography. And the bottom line, it is powerful. So I would like now to introduce my friend, and I don't say that often, but Sheryl is a friend. She's more than a work friend. And Sheryl I can also say that I don't have many friends that are Harvard Law graduates. So Sheryl is a Harvard Law graduate. She's laughing. I can hear her in my headphone. And when she made Aliyah, that means when she moved to Israel, she had a law practice in Jerusalem. And she basically woke up one day and said, hey, what am I doing to make a difference in the lives of young people, our next generation? And isn't that what all of us do? Because we don't go into education for money. Just shake your head if you agree with me. Do we go into education for money, for financial gain? No way. And the amount of hours that we put in for planning and evaluating our students' work, we can never be paid for, because it's many, many hours. So Sheryl had a reevaluation of her life, her goals, her mission, and where did she end up at Yad Vashem? And she has, I'm boasting, risen to the top. And she is one of their lead educators. She's part of Echoes and Reflections. And I'm so happy that I've been part of the journey with her when she began at Yad Vashem and all through the years. And through our association, she earned our certificate, our genocide prevention certificate, which may interest some of you if you're not interested in our master's program. So ladies and gentlemen, my friend, and I say that from the heart, my friend Sheryl Ochayon, her dog, please, the dog's name she told me is Tiny. My Hebrew is not great, but I said, Katantan? She said, no, only English. My dog is English. My dog listens to the English commands. So please tell Tiny we're sorry that we interrupted her evening usual walk around with you guys. And thank you very much. And we'd love you also to tell us just a minute or two about Echoes and Reflections, the two places that you're representing, Yad Vashem and Echoes and Reflections, because today we have some new participants. Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon.
And tell us what time it is in Jerusalem.
It's 4:38 in the afternoon here.
Okay.
You'll start to see the sun changing direction and it'll get darker as we're talking. But it's a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Gail. We definitely are friends, aside from being colleagues. And thank you for the buildup, because I was sitting here thinking to myself, on the one hand, I have less time to speak. But on the other hand, there was so much valuable information. Raz and Leonard both spoke about the human story and victims and hearing victims' voices and the testimony. And I think Michael also, when he brought it to put it together with the photographs, I think, you know, I can probably just leave and no, but I won't do that. I'm only kidding. So I am going to officially start, and thank you again. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Yes, I will definitely say a few words about Echoes and Reflections, because I am here as the program manager of Echoes and Reflections. Hopefully you can all see on your screen, you can see the website. Have I been talking all this time with a muted microphone?
No, it just cut off.
Okay. Because I was about to say, do I have to say all that again? No. Good. Great. So you see the screen, you see the website. Echoes and Reflections is a wonderful, I mean, I know that Gail put this seminar together with the hope that all of you who are teachers would walk out of here after these 4 days of seminar with a lot of practical information that you can use in your classroom. And I'm going to go out on a limb here that is really not a limb and say to you that Echoes and Reflections is one of the best resources that you can have. Echoes and Reflections is a partnership, excuse me. So it is Yad Vashem, which I represent, and I am their program manager. It is the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which has a very strong background and basis in all kinds of fighting racism and fighting anti-Semitism and all of that good stuff, social justice. And also the USC Shoah Foundation, which has given Echoes and Reflections over 65 terrific testimonies, which are very powerful to use in your classroom. We have 11 fully developed units, and in each unit on this website, there are 2, sometimes 3, sometimes even 4 full lesson plans with resources, with handouts, with photography and testimony and art and literature and poetry, and all of that stuff is put in one place for you, and also, of course, history. It's all put in one place for you to use. It's very, very user-friendly, and I'm going to walk you through the website a little bit as we go through this, and you will see how easy it is to use. So That's my 2 cents about echoes and reflections. And now, because you'll be seeing more of it, I promise. And now what I would like to do is share with you my PowerPoint. So that's where, whoops, we'll do that one more time. There we go. Hopefully you can see that, yes? Okay, so let me get rid of this. I always have to juggle all these little boxes. The topic today is using perpetrator and victim photographs to teach the Holocaust. And why do we have to be clear about both? We have to be clear about both because we have to treat them differently. So let me just advance a little bit. We already talked about the website. You are seeing the my entire screen, yes? I'm just making sure. Irvin, we good?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint.
Terrific, but not the notes, not the next slide. This is the first time I'm doing it this way. I'm a beginner, so.
Yeah, we can see that next slide panel.
Oh, you can. Okay, so then we'll just take that off. We don't want you to be able to see that. Hang on. Let me get out of here then. Sorry, bear with me for a second. Okay. And let's try that again. Here we go. So here's the PowerPoint. Here again is the website. Oh, it came back. All right, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull this out. Okay. So you guys, now you should be good. Yes? Yes. Okay, website. Pedagogical principles. One of the greatest things on the Echoes and Reflections website, and really one of the things that is the backbone of everything that we do, are the pedagogical principles for effective Holocaust instruction. And we have 9 principles. I put 5 of them up on the screen here because in today's, and you can find it under Pedagogy for Instruction on the website under the Prepare section of the website. In today's presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to be discussing the 2 that I have circled here. And Gail already said it. I mean, this week has been all about teaching the human story, and that is what we're going to do. You can see there are all kinds of bullet points under Teach the Human Story. You're going to translate statistics into personal stories. You're going to highlight examples of how victims attempted to retain their humanity. There are a lot of different things that go on here. You're going to make the victims into human beings, which is what they were before the Nazis took away their humanity. And how are you going to do this? You're going to use primary source materials. And that's what we're here to talk about today, because photographs are great primary source materials for you to use. So let me start with this. And I would love, I'm going to open up the chat box so that I can see it. And I would love it if you can, no, I didn't want to open it that big. I would love it if you could put in the chat for me what you think about this expression. A picture is worth 1,000 words. What do you think? I'm going to try and be a little bit interactive with you, at least right now, until I start to see that I'm running out of time, because that will always happen. But what do you think? Picture is worth 1,000 words. Would you agree with that expression? I mean, it's something that you hear all the time. Randy, did you respond? Layers? Agree. Natalia agrees. So true. Every picture tells a story and so much more. Thank you, Ellen. Stephen Marcus says agrees. Renee, everyone has their own interpretation. Judith Vogel, many more than 1,000 words, I guess is what you're saying. Barbara, true but limitations. We're going to get there, Barbara. Pictures are different through the lens of each viewer. Agree. Thank you, Karen. Picture is also perspective, perception of viewer from Morgan and from Jane, allows us to use our own experience. So many perspectives. Okay, you guys are great. You guys are on fire. So much chatting that I am going to go ahead and move forward here. And I would like for you to take a look at this picture that you see in front of you. And again, in the chat box, thank you, Ellen, captures moments that sometimes we don't see. In the chat box, write to me what you are seeing in this photograph, because what we're going to be talking about today is how you analyze a photograph. So the first thing that you're always going to do with your students, you're going to ask them, what do they see? Marissa says, She sees normalcy. That's great, Marissa. That's great. Be a little bit more specific with me. What do you see? What are the things that you see? Aside from normalcy, which is kind of a general. Friends, relaxed, says Renee. Thank you, Renee. Anybody else? Chatting, says Chris. Thank you. Hanging out with friends. Thanks, Natalia. Friends talking outside. Thanks, Barbara. Great. All of this is great. Ellen, people that may not know each other, getting to know each other. 5 people outdoors. Terrific. Okay, now look closely at the screen. Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Michael. People with edgy clothing. I like that. Intently listening to each other, conversing, maybe serendipitously. Terrific. Okay, now stop for a second and remember what you're seeing. And now take a look at this photograph. Whoops, take a look at this photograph. Okay, what do you think? What are you seeing now? What you're seeing now is something very different from what you saw before, because before you were only seeing a part of a photograph. This is a photograph of 9/11 taken from the Jersey side of the river. And these people are sitting outside as the smoke is billowing out of the Twin Towers. So it's a very different picture than what you thought you saw. Yeah, I won't go to bystanders, Randy, just because they're too far away to do anything really about this. And usually when we use the word bystanders, it has that kind of could have done something, but maybe didn't. So I'm just talking about the picture for now, because what we're going to get into here is analyzing the picture. And so this is the first point, is that yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. But sometimes the part of the picture or the picture that you're looking at is not telling the whole story. And sometimes it's telling the story from a specific perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and advance. And I love this quote. Photographs seem utterly real. They come, we imagine, directly to us without human meddling. And they are the most effortless food for the mind conceivable. And we're going to be talking about that seem utterly real. And you see what she says. This is Barbie Zelzer in Remembering to Forget, Holocaust Memory Through the Camera's Eye. You can see that she says, they come, we imagine, directly to us without human meddling. So that's what we're going to be talking about, is a lot of the human meddling that goes on here. And what happens and why we have to be very, very careful. I'm just going to give you one more real quick example of this, okay? I'm gonna interpret this one for you. You see a soldier giving another soldier some water. But if you look at the entire photograph, you see a different part of the photograph, and this is basically the same idea. And this photograph has been cropped to show you only the right-hand side of the photograph, which is a very different message, a message of help, a message of rescue, a message of assistance. And it's a very different photograph than, very different message than when you see the entire photograph. So yes, there was a point to this. And the point is that you have to be very careful, especially when you're looking at the photographs of perpetrators. So photography doesn't just reflect reality, it also interprets reality, and it can manipulate reality. Because you have all of these different photographic techniques, for instance, cropping, which you've seen in both of the illustrations that I just showed you, where you eliminate or emphasize certain elements in the photograph, but you're not seeing the entire thing. Sometimes the focus is only on specific subjects and other subjects are omitted. Sometimes photos can be staged. And sometimes the photograph betrays, or actually not sometimes, but all the time, the photograph betrays the worldview of the photographer. And what do I mean by that? Listen, you have to be very careful. Holocaust photographs are generally taken by perpetrators because, for obvious reasons, Jews in distress, Jews in ghettos, Jews in camps, Jews being rounded up, Jews being persecuted, many times did not have access to cameras, did not have access to films most of the time. I'm sure that Liz spoke with you yesterday about how they managed to make art, and that's a whole nother story. But it's the same type of thing here. So usually the photographs that we look at are going to be perpetrator photographs. And that's why you must be very careful when you're analyzing perpetrator photographs. You must always ask who took the photograph and why did they do it? Because a lot of times that will really tell you what's going on here. And I'm going to walk you through this and give you some examples. And really what I'll be using today are obviously our perpetrator photographs and also victim photographs where we have them. They're much, much rarer and harder to find. So remember that the Nazis used the term weapon to describe their photographic teams, and they had a lot of photographic teams. At the height of their photographic prowess, the Nazis had over 12,000 photographers in the field, and this was right around the time, right before Operation Barbarossa in 1941. 12,000 photographers in the field taking pictures of the Nazi victories and also of the annihilation of the Jews, which begins with the systematic annihilation, begins with Operation Barbarossa. So they did use the term weapon to describe their photographic teams, and that gives you a sense of what their photographs are trying to do. In other words, their photographs are not going to try and be fair with us. Their photographs are not going to show us that human story that we keep trying to find. Their photographs are going to show us exactly what they want us to see and nothing more than that. So bear that in mind. And now I'm going to give you a few examples. Right now we're in the Warsaw Ghetto, okay? And I put up that little warning propaganda messages. Normally, if we had more time and if we were in the classroom, I would ask you what you see here. And a lot of people will say they see, now remember, we're in the Warsaw Ghetto, so both of these women are Jewish. I will tell you that in advance. A lot of people will say, I see a well-dressed Jewish woman on one side and a Jewish woman in rags on the other side. And a lot of people will ask, are you sure this is in the ghetto? A lot of people will say, why are they standing so close together? And that leads you into the critical analysis, okay? Take a look at this picture. In what world would the woman on the left be standing so closely together with the woman on the right? It's not going to happen. It's not like they're friends. It's not like they're members of the same social class. This photograph was staged by the Germans. We know this. We know it was staged. Now, the question is, what are they trying to show? If they're staging a photograph like this, what are they trying to tell us? What is the message here? And again, if we had more time, and I apologize, but I want to leave room for questions if we can get there. The question is here, what are they trying to show? So I'm going to go ahead and just tell you that what they're trying to show really is Jews as greedy, Jews as not caring, because look at this wealthy woman standing together with this poverty-stricken woman. Obviously, she doesn't give a damn. Obviously, she only cares about herself. She's one of those selfish Jews. She's one of these horrible vermin who prey on the world. You know all of the German propaganda messages, all of the stuff they were putting out there. And this is an example of a propaganda photograph, which the Germans were using in the Warsaw Ghetto. It comes from a film, as you can see in the left-hand corner of the picture. It's called A Film Unfinished. And we have a clip from that the trailer that I'll show you in a couple of minutes. A Film Unfinished is a film that was done within the last 10 years by Yael Hersansky in Israel. And she was interested in exploring a container of film, a tin container that was found in a forest in East Berlin after the war. Now, this film canister had no name on it. It had no captions. It had no subtitles. It had no explanation that came with it. It was an hour long. And that's why she called her film A Film Unfinished, because clearly there was no soundtrack, there was no nothing. It was just the film itself. Clearly it was meant to be used for something, but it never was by the Germans because they never finished it. And what Yael Hersansky did is what we're going to be doing today. She took apart that film and she took a look at what was going on in that film and the propaganda messages that the Germans were trying to send. And how did she do that? By hearing the voices of the victims. And we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes. So this is another one of those photos that the Germans used as propaganda. And what do you see here? I'll make it easy for you again. Always ask your students, what is it that you see without interpretation? That's how you start, right? What do you see? And there were some really great responses in the chat box trying to do just that. In this picture, what you see are 5 people. What you see is 5 people. They are also Jewish. They are in the Warsaw Ghetto. You can tell by their armbands. And you can tell by the liquor bottles. You can see they're sitting at a bar. There are liquor bottles in front of them, behind them. So I'm going to tell you that these are Jews in a nightclub. Now, how is this possibly a propaganda message? Well, take a look and see what the Germans did with it. Okay, this comes from a German newspaper. You can see the picture that we were just looking at right in the middle, but look at what's going on around the sides of this newspaper. So the caption reads Jews in a nightclub, and around the sides, you can see Jews who are starving. You can see children with those huge circles under their eyes. They're very gaunt looking. You can see on the upper right-hand corner a man who seems to be sitting with his possessions, meager possessions, maybe a coat that's torn apart. You can see the typical, stereotypical religious Jew on the lower right-hand corner. And so the emphasis here is on the juxtaposition, okay? What the Nazis are doing is they're taking a photograph, which by the way was staged. They're taking a photograph and they're juxtaposing it with other photographs that show Jews in a terrible situation, in terrible distress. And the message is Jews don't care about each other. There is no solidarity. They're pigs. They're selfish. Okay, I'm going to go on. Same type of thing going on here. This is the courthouse in the Warsaw Ghetto. And these are, you can see well-dressed Jews coming out of the courthouse. You see the armbands. You can see a member of the Jewish police. You can tell that because he has an additional armband on his sleeve. And also by the cap, there are 2 more members of the police behind the couple that's walking out of the courthouse. But on the courthouse steps, you see a man who is basically passing out. He's exhausted. He's hungry. He's starving for whatever reason. And the caption, of course, it's not the caption, it's part of the text, one of the innumerable examples of Jewish solidarity. So this is what you see happening. And I'm going to tell you that Nazi propaganda thrived on this visual disinformation because it's not telling the correct story. They're staging these photographs and then they're putting captions on them, they're juxtaposing them, they're putting them in a light that shows the Jews as they wanted the Germans to see them, okay? This propaganda film was made to be used as propaganda for German audiences. And why would you do that? Why do you want to show the Jews as these horrible creatures, as these misers, as these selfish individuals? Why do you want to do that? Because, and this is really important, photographs can't kill, but they can justify violence or reveal the shifting moral compass that enables the perpetrator to kill. So if you can get public opinion behind you, if you can show how horrible these Jews are and get the public to believe it, then while the propaganda itself and the photographs themselves won't kill, you're sending a message, and that message can be translated into action. Just like words are very important, okay? If we agreed with the statement, a picture tells a picture is worth 1,000 words, all right? Then those 1,000 words are all aimed like guns at the hearts of these Jews. And the photographs and the words won't do it, but changing people's minds definitely can. So, just to show you a couple of more scenes, this is a scene again from the same film Unfinished. And you can see what's happening here is in the white coat, you see a Jewish policeman. You can identify them by the cap. And also if his arm was at a different angle, you would see that he has another armband on aside from the armband of the ghetto. And
Sheryl,
it looks like he's arrested. Sure, Gail.
May I ask for clarification? And this was in the chat. So the name of the film is A Film Unfinished?
Correct.
Okay, and can you tell us or put it in the chat box the name of the person who found the film?
The person who found it, I don't know. The person who the filmmaker's name is Yael,
Yeah, that's the name. That's the name we got. Right.
Yael Hersonsky, Hersonski. And
Okay.
Morgan actually has, she will be sending out
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you can, I think that you can actually even see it online. Let me just caution you, as long as there's interest. Let me caution you. This is not a film that I would show for students. Not. There's a lot of graphic stuff in here. There's a lot of very difficult things that are very difficult to watch. This is a film that I would use for your own edification. This is a film that I would use for your own background knowledge. And I think that's also very important, so that you get the story right and you understand what's going on here.
Okay, one more quick question. So you had shown us some photographs, and some of people are writing that now. Where did you, are these on the Echoes and Reflections website, or how can we access them if we see a particular photo, not from the film, that you're showing us today?
Okay, so I don't have a catalog of all of the photographs that I put in into this presentation, which I worked very hard on.
It's excellent, thank you.
But what I can, oh sure. What I can tell you is, first of all, on the Yad Vashem website, you'll find a lot of ghetto pictures in the Echoes and Reflections website also, and we'll get back to that in a couple of minutes. On the Yad Vashem website, we have a video toolbox that's called Daily Life in Warsaw Ghetto. You'll see a lot of the images from that toolbox, and you'll also see a video toolbox that is, hang on, not a video toolbox, but another resource, which is a Yad Vashem. It's a booklet. There's a teacher's version and a student's version that is about the Warsaw Ghetto, life in the Warsaw Ghetto, and many of these photographs come from that resource. And actually, the video toolbox about the Warsaw Ghetto shows you that resource.
So I'm going to just read, before you go on, just a few of the questions, just because it relates to what you did. So were the ghetto, Barbara Daniel asks, so were the ghetto photos released to foreign press? In other words, were these photos like taken in the Warsaw Ghetto that was staged? Could you have seen it in the New York Times, for example?
Okay, so let me tell you that it's the longest movie that was ever made in the Warsaw Ghetto, and we know that it was made in the Warsaw Ghetto because a lot of our diarists write a film crew has come into the ghetto. Adam Chernyakov, who is the head of the Judenrat, writes about it. Chaim Kaplan, who was an educator in the Warsaw Ghetto, writes about it. And there are other people who mention the film crews in the ghetto. Even Władysław Szpilman, who is the pianist from the movie The Pianist, writes about that. Then the next slide. So this is the longest film that was ever made in the Warsaw Ghetto. And when it was found, many Holocaust institutions began to use it. It's not something that you would find, the pictures weren't published in the New York Times, not that type of thing. But many Holocaust institutions used it because we had no other film of the Warsaw Ghetto. And that's why I'm saying, whenever you have perpetrator film, perpetrator photographs, you have to think about this for a second. Should they have used it? Because it presents a very one-sided view of what life was like in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I'm going to show you that you always have to balance these things. I think the impetus was to use this film because we had nothing else, but that's very dangerous. And you'll see that in the Auschwitz album also, in the second session that I'm doing after around 5:30 or so. You'll see the same thing. It's whenever you're talking about perpetrator resources, you have to be very careful. One thing that I can tell you, Barbara it was who asked the question.
Yes.
There are different series of photographs that come from the Warsaw Ghetto. There are at least 10 different series of personal photographs that were taken by soldiers. Remember that Warsaw is kind of right in the middle of Poland, so a lot of soldiers who are going to the east. stopped in Warsaw and went to the ghetto and took photographs because it was almost like visiting animals in a zoo. They had heard so much about these bestial Jews. They wanted to go see what all the fuss was about. And there are at least 10 series of personal photographs, a series of photographs that were taken by different photographers. There are also the propaganda company photographs. There's Jost, J-O-S-T, that's the basis for the resource that we have in the Yad Vashem teacher's booklet that I referred to earlier.
Thank you.
So far, so good?
Great.
You're very
Thank
welcome.
you. And ladies and gentlemen, please continue to use your chat box, and we will stop you at some points to pose those questions. Thank you.
Can I also make
I only
Oh,
pray
and
that I
Dr.
can get
Hayes wanted to say something.
Cheryl, I just want to make a comment about those previous photographs that you showed that were in the German publication. I'm not sure which one. About that it so perfectly drives home your point about the propaganda, because they're documenting some of the real suffering in the Warsaw Ghetto, but not just by juxtaposing the pictures, but then by using text, to reinforce that message, and I can read the German, right? They're actually very deliberately telling the viewers of these photographs how they're supposed to read them. So it not only is the juxtaposition, but they are interpreting it for the audience, right? And the rich one amuses himself, right? And while the suffering is going on, and the previous one was even worse, right? So the photographs that could really show the suffering become this other message. So, so it's, a photo tells it is worth 1,000 words, but a few words with a photograph weaponizes those photographs.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Hayes. Thank you very much. Okay, so unless anybody else wants to stop me, I'm going to try and make some headway here because I have so much to show you. This is also from a film Unfinished, and this is also a staged photograph. Oh, I didn't get finished explaining the previous one. So what you see is the Jewish policeman, and he is arresting a Jew. And you can, in the film, you can see that he's really manhandling him and being very aggressive. But there's something here that the Germans didn't mean to be here. And that is, if you look to the left of the Jewish policeman in the white coat, you can actually see the photographer. So this is an outtake. This would have been an outtake, or it would have been cropped so that you wouldn't be able to see that this was purposely being staged. And that's a tip-off. That right away is a tip-off that we know that this was a staged photo, just like the next one. The next one, again, the wealthy Jews who are profiting at the expense of the poor Jews. And here is a statement by Władysław Szpilman, again. The Germans were making these films before they liquidated the ghetto to give the lie to any disconcerting rumors if news of the action should reach the outside world. They would show how well off the Jews of Warsaw were and how immoral and despicable they were too. So you understand what's going on here. Again, these are all propaganda photos. I was going to show you the trailer for a film Unfinished, but Morgan does have the link, and she will send it to you so you can watch it yourself. I think that the entire film is available on YouTube, but I would like to make some more headway here. So I'm just going to keep going. So when you're analyzing photographs, especially if they're perpetrator photographs from the Holocaust, you're always going to want to know who was the photographer. Why was the photograph taken? Where was it found? Was it distributed? If so, to whom? I'll give you an example. Jost, who I mentioned, took a series of, I think it was even over 100 photographs in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he never looked at them. He developed them, put them in a drawer, okay? Put them in a drawer. He felt sick that night, he says. Later on, he gave the photographs to the German newspaper Stern, which gave them to Yad Vashem, and that's how we have them. And that's, I think, very telling. The fact that he couldn't look at these photographs, the fact that he felt sick after walking around in the ghetto all day, it's very telling. So what are the circumstances? What's absent from the photograph? Was it staged, and were the subjects forced to cooperate? Because we know, for instance, in the same roll of film, and this is where it starts to get very graphic and difficult to watch, there are actually scenes in a bathhouse where the Germans forced Jewish men and Jewish women to get naked and to get into the shower together, borderline pornography. So when using perpetrator photographs, and this is the point, if I have to hit you over the head with one point today, this is going to be it. Whenever you use perpetrator photographs, you have to listen for the victim's voice. Again, because these photographs are skewed. And what we want to do is we want to give a sense of what's really happening here. So you always need to listen for the voice of the victim. And that's what we're going to try and do now. I'm going to try and go through some photographs with you. Actually, okay, my plan was to end at around 5:15, but let me just show you some photographs, and I guess Gail will stop me if there's anything urgent in the chat box. I want to show you how you do this. And I want to use, okay, this is from the Warsaw Ghetto. This is a photograph. It comes from a German film, and it's showing smugglers. Now, these smugglers were arrested. You can see they're all children. They were forced to empty out their clothing, and you can see what's falling on the ground. It's nothing but turnips and root vegetables, and nothing that any of us is, I mean, when you crave something, when you're hungry for something, that's not what you want to eat. But that's what these children were able to smuggle in. I will tell you that in the Warsaw Ghetto, most people, the calorie allotment for the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto was about 184 calories a day. And that's not enough to live on. That's less than a packet of M&Ms, if those of you out there who like chocolate, like me. And so almost more than 80% of the food that was eaten in the Warsaw Ghetto came in through smuggling. And a lot of times it was children like this that smuggled. Now you see these children, you can see how young they are, you can see that they're very thin, you can see that they're surrounded by police. Obviously, in this propaganda image, what the Germans are doing is they're saying these people are criminals, they steal, they can't be trusted, they're thieves. Now, let's listen for the victim's voice, for the victim's voice. And this is Emanuel Ringelblum, who, of course, kept the Oneg Shabbos archive in the Warsaw Ghetto. And what he says is the children who were smuggling had the most extraordinary and fantastic courage. These children went through the ghetto wall several times a day, laden with goods that often weighed more than they did. So this is a completely different picture. Now, think about it. Put these two images, the image together with the words here, and think about the fact that these children, not only were they heroes, okay, they were taking their lives in their hands, because every time they went through that wall to bring those horrible turnips and vegetables to their families who were starving, they could have been killed. There were many, in other diaries we find a lot of references to the fact that children were shot right at the ghetto wall. There's actually a scene in The Pianist, those of you who are familiar with the movie, that come right out of Spielmann's diaries, where he watched a child being beaten to death while half of his body was on one side of the wall and half of his body was on the other. So there were children who were killed and the blood was still wet on the sidewalk, and other children were back smuggling again, because that was the only way to keep their families alive. And understand what that does also to a family. That tears a family apart, because first of all, the parents can't support those children, and they have to make the decision, should they stop their children from smuggling, because their children could die doing this. They could be killed doing this. So how does a mother make a decision like that? It's one of those things we call a choiceless choice. I'll give you one more example from the Warsaw Ghetto, and I'm not going to play Vladka's testimony. This is Vladka Mead. Her testimony is in Echoes and Reflections in Unit 10. And if we had more time, I would love to play her testimony. But she talks about these smugglers. And you can see kind of the caption, through all kinds of holes, through all kinds of places. She talks about the bravery of these these kids. They were kids, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And here's another picture that's a German propaganda picture. And what you see here is a poor, unfortunate child. Again, you can see that his boots are on the way out. His coat is going. He's suffering. You can see the look on his face. He's probably suffering from hunger. And this is also made to show Jews in this light of, look at this refuse. It's human refuse. It's trash on the streets. But let's listen for the voice of the victims. Let's pair this picture with a testimony. Again, Emanuel Ringelblum. I was told about a horrible scene that took place in front of 20 Muranovska Street. A 6-year-old beggar boy lay gasping all night, too weak to roll over to the piece of bread that had been thrown down to him from the balcony above. So if you think about that quote, it tells you a few things. First of all, that there was charity in the ghetto, that Jews were not selfish, that Jews did try, there was mutual assistance, and they did try and help each other. In this horrible case, this boy, someone threw a piece of bread down to him. Now think about that for another second, because you always have to penetrate the layers here. Anyone who was throwing bread down to a beggar had to think 3, 5, 10 times whether or not they themselves could part with that bread, because they have their own family and they are also probably very hungry. And this boy must have been begging in the courtyard. And we know from diarists in the ghetto that that was the nightly noise, that there were people begging in these courtyards for food. And this person threw down a piece of bread to this boy who was too weak already at that point to roll over and eat it. And I know from Ringelblum's diary that what happened, what do you think happened to that bread? Whoever it was that threw it down went the next morning and picked it up and brought it back and ate it, even though it had been lying down on that sidewalk the whole night, because bread was not something that you wasted in the Warsaw Ghetto. So those are pictures from Warsaw. I just want to again refer you to Echoes and Reflections. I see Gail wants to say something, but I think you're muted, Gail, possibly.
Barry had an excellent question. He said, in any of the photos, did the Germans use any of their own people to stage the photos instead of using Jews?
Meaning, were there Germans in these photos? I don't think so. I couldn't tell you for sure, but I don't think so, because Germans would have looked profoundly different than Jews. The Jews were already very haggard and starving to death. And that's a completely different, you could see the bones of their faces. I doubt it.
Barry, did that answer your question?
Barry, I can't tell you that I've seen every photograph that was ever taken by a German. That would be untrue. But I would highly doubt, there was so much material. I would highly doubt that they would have used one of their own in a photograph like this.
Okay, and he's shaking his head yes. Okay, great. Thank you, Barry. Thank you.
Great. Sure. So again, this is, I was hoping to go in and out of the website, but that takes some time. So I just wanted to show you what I'm going to do now for the next few minutes is move into the Lodz ghetto, because a lot of times to hear the voices of the victims, you don't only have to use testimony. Lodz is one of those cases where we actually have victim photographs, and those are incredible stories. So I want to go through that with you a little bit too. Lodz is the ghetto that is our focus in the lesson plan in Echoes and Reflections. So for more information about the Lodz ghetto and for all the testimonies that you can already see on the slide, you can go to Echoes and Reflections and you can take a look. And also Morgan has the links to these too, so she can send everything out to you, everything that we don't have time to listen to, she will send. And I see Morgan nodding. Thanks, Morgan. Okay, so this is the Lodz ghetto, and very briefly, this is a story, an incredible story. The perpetrator photographs were a set of 600 color slides that were found in 1987 in the basement of a secondhand bookshop in Vienna. It turns out that there was a man named Walter Genowine, who you see in this slide. This is a kind of a self-portrait. He was the chief accountant in the Lodz ghetto. He was the guy who, moved all the money around behind the scenes. He allotted the budget, all of that type of thing. And he was an amateur photographer. And he actually confiscated a camera from one of the Jews in the ghetto and wrote to AGFA. AGFA was the company way back when, in the 1930s. We're talking here 1939, 1940. AGFA was the company that had first developed color film. And he really wanted to use color film to take pictures of the Lodz ghetto. And he did. He took a series of over 600 pictures, and you see some of them here. This is the type of thing that's really very dramatic because we think of the Holocaust in black and white. And so anytime you see a color picture, you kind of have to sit up and take notice. The color here is a little bit muted, and actually Genowine wrote to AGFA to protest the fact that his pictures were coming out with a reddish hue. But I'm going to ask you to just kind of look at these pictures for a little while and, tell me, don't tell me because we don't have time, but think to yourselves, what are you seeing here? You're seeing images of people working. You're seeing the street scene, that first, street scene right there. Okay, there are a lot of people. Maybe it's a little crowded. In this picture, you see the man in the middle. He does look a little bit poor. Maybe he's selling the things that he's got in front of them. There's a crowd around him. In this picture, you see people working. They're actually making straw shoes that were used by the Germans in their winter offensive. And here you see a courtyard in the ghetto on the right forefront. That's Hans Bibov, who was actually the administrator of the Lodz ghetto. So these pictures you don't really get a sense of what's happening in the ghetto from any of these pictures. And these are all, again, pictures that were taken by Walter Genowine. This is another one of the pictures taken in one of the workshops in the Lodz ghetto. Just take a look for a second and you can see how gaunt these people already are. Their faces seem to be elongated, no smiling. They're very cold. Even when there are human beings and faces in the pictures, they're very cold. But let me just give you a feel for what's actually going on in the Lodz ghetto, and then we're going to see some victim photographs, and you'll see the contrast is amazing. So first of all, the Lodz ghetto was extremely crowded. The population reaches 230 to 250,000. There are 8 to 10 people in each room. It is the ghetto with the highest mortality rate from starvation. Probably 20 to 21% of the people in the Lodz ghetto will perish because they are so hungry or because of the living conditions. 63% of the homes don't have bathrooms. 98% don't have cooking gas, which means if you're a mother, you have to find wood and you have to start a fire and it's a whole long story. Deportations begin in 1942, and of all of these 230 to 250,000 people who passed through the ghetto, only 877 Jews were left at liberation. So now, I know we're nearing the end of this time slot here, but again, and this is the point that I'm hitting you over the head with, hear the voices of the Jewish victims. If you can give them back their names and faces, then do that. Because the perpetrators did not see them as human beings, we owe it to them. So Mendel Grossman was a photographer in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was a photographer in the statistics department, which meant that he was supposed to be limited in his picture taking to pictures of work cards, employee cards, because Lodz basically becomes a labor camp. Those people who aren't sent to death are forced to work. By the time in 1942, sometime in the middle of 1942, over 90 people who are still alive in the ghetto, 90%, of the people who are still alive in the ghetto are actually working at forced labor. And Mendel Grossman is supposed to take pictures for their employee cards. But what he does is he also takes pictures surreptitiously. He hangs a camera around his neck. He opens the pictures of his raincoat because he keeps a raincoat on. He has cut the pockets of the raincoat so that he can have his hands in the pockets, and that way he can open and close the raincoat, and then he snaps pictures very quickly. one of the amazing things that he does is he records a lot of things that the Germans would never have wanted anyone to see, like hangings, like deportation, like the poverty and the starvation. One of the most amazing things that he does, and this is my attempt to give the victims back their names and their faces, he records his own family's slow slide into starvation and death. So this is his nephew. This is his sister's son, whose name is Yaakov, but he's called very affectionately Yankush. You can see that Yankush is an adorable little kid. He's curious. He's got those twinkly, mischievous eyes. Here he is standing on line with his mother for food in the ghetto. So you see it's this bright little boy. You see he's curious about the world around him. He's interested. He's got a half smile on his face. And here is an interesting picture because you see him eating in the house with his father, who was Mendel Grossman's brother-in-law. I love this picture because it makes you think, okay? I'm going to tell you what you see. You see a father and a son eating a bowl of soup, each of them, and you see another thing that's very important here, and that is that Yankush is eating his soup wearing a scarf and a jacket and a hat. And his father, too, is wearing a hat. And that's very important because it gives you cues as to what's really going on in the ghetto, things that you would never see in Genowine's photographs. And that is that it's cold because there is no heat. The Germans barely gave these people any coal in the winter. That was what they burned for heat. And so because many of the houses in the ghetto were made of wood, people started burning their staircases, their stair rails. I told you that only 63%, less than 63% were connected to bathrooms. 63% were not connected to bathrooms, which means there were outhouses. People took the doors off the outhouses and burned them for heat, which means that you have no privacy when you go to the bathroom. This is all the stuff that's going on, okay? You can see what you see in the picture, but I'm giving you some context here. And these are the things that the Germans never would have told you. In this picture, I have 3 more pictures and then I'll stop, Gail, because I see I'm looking at the time. In this picture, Yankush is eating in bed with his mother. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because they're freezing, and it could also be because they've used their table to burn for fuel, because many people did that in the Lodz ghetto. And this is the last picture in the sequence of Yankush. And in this picture, you can already see how he's slowly fading away. You can see that there's pain in his eyes. You can see his hands are probably swollen. What he's eating in this picture, there's no more soup. What he's eating in this picture is a carrot. What happened in the Lodz ghetto is a lot of times when provisions were brought in, like vegetables, when they were brought in, a lot of times they were rotten already. They were things that had been sent to the front to be used by German soldiers. If they weren't used, they came back to the Lodz ghetto. Sometimes they were frozen and they needed to be thawed out. What is a carrot when it's frozen and you thaw it out? I'm not talking about your little mini carrots or microwaves. There were none of those. A carrot is going to be mostly water, or a lot of water at least, and it's going to be rubbery and it's going to be gummy. And this is what this little boy is eating because there is nothing else. He's cold. You can see that he's still wearing his scarf and his hood. And this is the true story. So when you think about the Genowine photographs and you think about a story like a photograph like this is what I mean when you say use victims' photographs if you have them to give the other side of the story. And if you don't have them, use the victims' words, like in the testimonies that we saw with the Warsaw Ghetto. So I have probably 65 more slides, but I'll stop here.
Yes,
if
Sheryl.
there are questions.
Yes, thank you for sharing with us the true story through using photography. And Dr.
Sure.
Michael Hayes has some questions and he may have some comments. Thank you.
Okay.
Mike?
Okay. Yeah, there's some really good questions that are coming across. And so I'll take them pretty much in the order that some of them came in. So first, the steps of how to teach the analysis is critical with the resources. anything to share with this would be appreciated. So thanks for that.
I'm not sure I understood the question, Michael.
Okay, yeah.
That was in regards to in general sharing your PowerPoint. So I just let them know that it may not be available, but many of the resources mentioned in it would be.
Oh, absolutely. All of these resources are available online, and I'm hoping that Lori Gerson, on the first day of the seminar, took you through, the Yad Vashem names database and also the
Yes,
photo
she
archives.
did. She
Yad
did.
Vashem photo, great.
Yes,
So
and if
almost everything you will find there.
I know that
Go ahead, Jill.
Cheryl's voice broke up a little bit, but if anyone needs assistance with that, we will help you in navigating their website. But I will say, if I understood the question correctly, and I might not have, or part of the question, is that sometimes I just give my students a photograph, just what Sheryl did today, who's an excellent educator, just said, what do you see? And that's how she started, and that's why what I start often with my students, what do you see? And then maybe we learn the history, or we read a poem or a piece of literature that supplements the photograph, which is exactly what Mike Hayes did today with Leonard. So if you're asking for some approaches, I always use photography to supplement the historical facts. Mike, some more questions.
Yeah, Leanne asks about the photos taken by H. Ross in the Lodz Ghetto that were in an exhibit in New York City.
Absolutely. So that was part of the PowerPoint that I actually didn't get to. But I have a whole series by Henrik Ross. And let me just tell you, as far as resources, okay, as far as resources go, you will see, and I'm trying to find him really quickly, you will see on the Yad Vashem website, and this is also, there he was, I'm sorry. On the Yad Vashem website, you will see that there is a video toolbox about using photography. And there's Henrik Ross, and I'll just show you some of his pictures very quickly. Because Henrik Ross was, yeah, like, I'm sorry, Gail?
I'm sorry, that was a half a sneeze, sorry.
Oh, okay. Henrik Ross, like Mendel Grossman, was a photographer in the Department of Statistics office in the Lodz Ghetto. And Henrik Ross took some amazing photographs. This is the toolbox on the Yad Vashem website, Documentation of Atrocities, it's called. And Morgan has that link as well. So she will be sending that to you. Some of his photographs, and you can see, these are actually Mendel Grossman photographs, but this is a Henrik Ross photograph. You take a look at a photograph like this and you can see the scale. This is from one of the synagogues in Lodz that was, of course, destroyed by the Nazis, and you can see the scale, very, very dramatic. A man who saved a Torah scroll. You know, the treatment of the Jews in these pictures, of the victims in these pictures, is much more sympathetic. This is a perfect example. They were human beings. They kissed their children. They loved their families. The Germans aren't going to show you that. And that's why it was necessary for these photographers. This is the type of photograph also taken by Henrik Ross, very controversial. Because it was taken of children at a time when there were almost no children left in the Lodz Ghetto. After September 5th of 1942, most of the children in Lodz were taken to Chelmno, and they were killed there in that extermination camp. And the fact that 2 children who were left, who must have been children of Jewish police or other prominent people in the Lodz Ghetto who had protection, protectia we call it, the fact that they could be playing Jewish policeman and victim also kind of throws you for a loop. It's not something that you typically see, and it's maybe not even something that you want to think about, but it's something that's also very natural, which just goes back to the fact that these people were human beings, for good, for better, for worse. So these are some of Henrik Ross's pictures. Yes, those are Genowine's pictures, and this is either Mendel Grossman or Henrik Ross. So, and also the deportation pictures. This is an incredible picture taken by Henrik Ross at the prison where people were held before they were deported, and more of the same. So yes, it's very important to hear and to see these victims, to see these deportations, because the Germans aren't going to show you any of this. This one is tragic. This is a Henrik Ross picture. Children, again, in that action on September 5th, 1942, who were put in a wagon and taken away. Yeah.
Thank you. That's those are such powerful pictures. Alexandra Gellner writes that, well, she sends a link, which I can't share, but I went to it, and it includes photos of SD officers humiliating a Jew by cutting off his beard, an Orthodox Jew. And she writes, I understand this photo was taken from a staged raid. Would you consider this propaganda through these instances, though these instances certainly happen, and do you think it's all right to use this as an example of intolerance and targeted humiliation?
There are so many pictures that were not staged, that if you feel comfortable about using one that you know was staged, I mean, the examples that I gave you today came from 2 different ghettos because we have a lot of testimony to rebut the pictures, and we also had victim photographs to rebut the German photographs. There are so many other instances of German perpetrators who took pictures that would humiliate the Jews, who took pictures of the Jews with their peyot, their payas, being cut off, Jews being forced to say Kaddish with bare feet, which is against the Jewish religion, Jews being forced to do all kinds of things, beards being ripped off. There are so many of those. I don't remember the name of the questioner, but there are so many of those. Just go ahead and find a different one that you know was not staged, because that was what happened, and it was done spontaneously. There was never an order given to these Germans to cut beards off, to cut off payas. Nothing like that ever happened. But when they were confronted with these stereotypical Jews who were in such a minority in Germany, Jews were mainly assimilated into the general population. When they got to the East and they saw these stereotypical Jews, that was what they thought to do, because they had been educated to hate these people. So again, if you know that that photograph was staged, don't use it. Find a different one. There are many. There are very, very many, unfortunately.
Ellen Bernstein asks if you could possibly share the last photo of the child, Yaakov, eating the carrot, because she thinks that she could use that when she is teaching younger children.
Oh, sure. That's on the Vashem website.
Right.
It's on the Vashem website. Very easy to find. Look up Mendel Grossman, and you will even find it in Google. Just Google it.
The link is in the chat now.
It's in the chat box.
Great.
There you go. All right. Is it possible to have staged photos post-mass atrocity to help tell the story of the victims as an expression of art, and also as a way to tell the victim's story?
Okay, run that by me one more time. Staged
Right.
photos.
It concludes with, I hope that makes sense. Is it possible to have staged photos post-mass atrocity to help tell the story of the victims and as an expression of art, and also a way to tell the victim's story? Yeah, I'd have to interpret that question, but I think the question is whether or not the staged photographs can be used as a way that art, in this case photography, is used, but to do it in a way that tells the victim story and not just the perpetrator's view. I may be misinterpreting that question.
I'll tell you something. I really, okay. The first, and maybe it's just the wording here that's confusing me, but a staged photograph of a mass atrocity? Was that the intention?
Post-mass atrocity. I think it means using the photograph after the event, right? In other words, looking back at genocide, for instance, like the Holocaust.
And are we talking about, listen,
actually, I think maybe what we could
Natalie is asking, Natalie Love is the one that posed the question. Irving, can you unmute her? She would like to be very specific in her question. And let me preface to say, I am the timekeeper one of them. And after this question, we need to move on to the next section with Sheryl, unless Mike, you have a concluding comment.
Oh, no, I think it's self-explanatory.
Okay, so Natalie, you're on.
Thank you so much for unmuting me. So this question is very specific and it comes from, I'm Bulgarian. And so there are some photographs of Bulgarian atrocities perpetrated against Bulgarians, but they're staged photos. And what I mean by that, so during the mass atrocity that has happened during the Ottoman period, of course, there are no photographs taken. People don't have the resources to do that. But years later, photographers would use the location, the church that was burned, to try to recreate and tell the story of what happened during those times of the killings. And so my questions are things like that that are staged later on as a visual expression. Is that okay?
Thanks very much for explaining that to me, because I didn't understand it at all, and now I understand much better. Is that okay? Listen, you know that the film footage that we have, for instance, of the liberation of Auschwitz was staged by the Russian army, right? That was not original film footage. They did not arrive and immediately get the camera out and liberate people. It was actually redone a few days after liberation. So that's the same type of thing. I would say it's borderline. I would say maybe pure art would be a better expression rather than a photograph of a staged atrocity. What else would I say? I would say it crosses into that area that starts to make you uncomfortable. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay. But I do think that if something like that is done and you are upfront about the fact that it was staged in order to present this visual this visual rendering of something that already happened, if you're upfront about it, that takes away a lot of the stigma and a lot of the problematic nature.
Yeah, I think that doesn't, Sheryl, don't you think that often happens with photographs, not just in the Holocaust, but like the raising of the flag over Iwo Jima by American forces, or the hanging of the flag by Soviet troops over the Reichstag building in
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, Michael. My only problem is the atrocity nature. That's my only problem.
Right.
Yeah, these things are reenacted all the time and photographs are taken of them. As long as they're not atrocities, that's where you start getting into a gray area. But
right, but even those that are staged that way, it's best if you're going to use them to mention that to the people you're showing them to, right? That you know that this is not an actual sort of live original photograph in that sense.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. Okay, so what we're going to do now, and thank you all very much, and thank you all for your participation, and thanks for the help with the technology and all of that.